Hello, everyone. This is Planet Mitch again from Planet 5D, and today we're going to be talking with Dan Chung from the website DSLR News Shooter, which is always a tongue twister to me, .com. We're going to talk a little bit today about the trip that Dan had over to Japan during the earthquake tsunami situation, and we're going to talk about DSLRs and just about anything else that anybody wants to talk about from the chat room. I'm pretty sure that most of you guys know about the chat room, and I always point over there because I keep it on my second monitor so I can keep track of the questions. And the joy of using Ustream is that the people in the chat room get to help me ask the questions. So anyway, we're going to switch it over to Dan Chung and say hi, Dan. And
Greetings.
Just because there may be people out there that don't know who you are, would you give us a quick intro as to who you are and what you do and why we want to talk to you?
Well, I don't know why you want to talk to me, but I can tell you what I do, and then we can go from there. Okay, so I guess I'm a kind of filmmaker now. I've been making images my whole professional life. I've been a photographer for about 20 years. And I've been shooting video for the past 5 or 6, and I work mainly for a British newspaper and website called The Guardian, but I also work for other people as well. And I was recently assigned to cover the aftermath of the tsunami, and I guess that's the main reason why you want to talk to me today. So,
what is your main camera of choice these days for shooting?
My main camera of choice, it is still the Canon 5D Mark II after all this time. And for those of you who don't know, I guess I was pretty early on the 5D Mark II bandwagon. I've been shooting it since the day it came out. So
you were one of the first, weren't you? I remember you had one of the first videos online.
Yeah, I had I think it's true to say I had the first production 5D Mark II video online.
Right. I don't remember what it was, though. Was it?
I think it was just some test shots from around Beijing, I think. But I got the camera from the store. I didn't even come home. I just went out and shot the video.
Right.
So
that's part of your claim to fame as being the first production.
I hope that's not a claim to fame.
What other cameras have you got these days?
What cameras haven't I got? I have everything. I've got a Panasonic AF100 sitting there. I have a 600D somewhere. What else? A 1D Mark IV somewhere. Seems to be a Sony NEX5 here. There's an NEX5 kicking around on the desk. There's a few. Panasonic GH2, I think. Yeah, I've got a lot of cameras.
So you're brand agnostic there, or you?
I have cameras I like. I'm not gonna. My priority is to do my job. I'm sure, like most of the people that you have on the show, it's the camera that works for the job that you're doing. It doesn't matter what the brand is, as long as it works. And most of the time, at the moment, it's a Canon 5D Mark II. Next year, who knows?
Brett wants to say, by the way, that your first video cost him $2,700. He bought the 5D.
Apologies, Brett. I'm sorry.
So you mentioned that you've got the AF100. How is that working out for you?
The AF100, I haven't. It's a little bit early to say yet. Really, I've only had it for a few days, and I tested it prior to it coming out, and I don't really want to pass judgment on it too much. I'm not a huge fan of Micro Four Thirds as a sort of frame size, a form factor, a sensor size. But I'm still loving that 5D Mark II look. But I can see the benefit of, especially for what I do, which is sort of news and current affairs related, having all the audio stuff and everything in one camera. So I'm just playing with it at the moment, and I'll let you know.
So let's dive into the Japan situation. I listened to the audio podcast you did when you got back with the students at the university, and I don't remember what university it was.
Those are my students at the Beijing Foreign Studies University, and it's a master's course they do in multimedia and visual journalism. So I wouldn't normally go speaking about something straight after I get back from the event, but seeing as they're really there to be learning about this stuff. I mean, they've kind of specific to do that. I thought it was a benefit for them. And they put the webcast up. So,
well, I suspect that most people haven't heard that. We copied it in the post that I made, but I don't know whether the people who will watch this later. So, if you wouldn't mind, give us a quick run through. One of the most fascinating parts of it to me, from a guy who sits here in the Midwest of the United States and does this kind of reporting. I don't get to go out and do the kind of stuff you do, especially trying to get ready to go into a disaster area like that. So would you mind just giving us a run through of how that came about and sort of what you needed to prepare to get over there?
Okay. Well, I mean, sadly, I guess, I've been covering disasters and tragedies for a very long time now. I've been to many pretty horrific events. Actually, I went to the aftermath of the first Asian tsunami, I guess we call it now. I don't know, the tsunami in Indonesia. I've been to earthquakes in Pakistan. I covered the second Iraq war. I was embedded for that.
Really?
I was an embedded journalist for that. I've been to all sorts of places which weren't particularly pleasant. So I guess it's my job, but you're never ready for it. You're never ready for whatever comes. Ultimately, you can prepare as much as you want. You're not ready for what you're about to see. But so much as you can prepare, I have a kit bag. It has basically my essential equipment, a couple of 5D bodies, 2 or 3 lenses, laptop, and then I have, so that's the camera kit. I don't really have to think about that. I just pick it up and go.
Right.
And then I have another bag, which is emergency supplies, clothing, medical kit, and it's pretty much the usual stuff that anybody doing this stuff will have, by the door, ready to go. Then you just have to worry about getting to wherever it is that the disaster's happened, and that's normally where the problems start.
Right.
So I think perhaps people imagine that if you're a member of the press, you have some special privileged access to get you on a plane to get to wherever it is that you want to go, and that's just so far from the truth. As soon as I'd heard it had happened, I called a couple of my colleagues, and just was trying to check out the scale. Just how bad it was. I don't know if anybody was actually following it at the time when it occurred, but nobody really knew just how bad the situation was in Japan.
Right.
It took a few days for us to actually really realize. But you've got to make a judgment call. Is this really bad? Is this something that the readers of the Guardian are going to care about? Obviously, it is. And then, there's a quick couple of phone calls to the office, and that's it. You're on your way to the airport, and you're trying to find a way to get to Japan. And when I got to the airport, I found pretty much all of my colleagues from Beijing also waiting to try and get to Japan. So there was the BBC, CNN, NBC. The Daily Telegraph, loads and loads of journalists, China-based journalists were having the same idea, we'd all booked onto a specific flight to Japan, and unsurprisingly, it was cancelled. So, sort of less than half a day after it had happened, most of the flights in and out of Japan got cancelled. People were worried about cracked runways, worried about, danger to aircraft landing, that sort of thing. So, immediately we were stuck. And in the end, what we had to do was get a flight to Seoul in Korea,
right,
from Beijing, and then sit on the ground and try and get a flight from Seoul into Japan. We were kind of lucky. We managed to get one of the few remaining flight tickets from Seoul to Tokyo. And so we managed to get there. It took us in the end about a day to get to Japan. When I say us, I went with a Guardian reporter called Jonathan Watts, just so people know. I wasn't travelling on my own. I was travelling with another colleague, which always makes things a lot easier.
Yeah,
so that's how it got to be in Japan.
I wouldn't want to be trying to travel into that kind of a situation by myself, much less doing it in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a few times I've had to go places on my own, but even when you do, there's a sort of camaraderie, a band of brothers get thing going on with a lot of journalists and photographers and cameramen, and so you normally find somebody to buddy up with, even if they're not from your own news organisation or from your, you might not even know them before you arrive, but somehow you tend to find some travelling companion somewhere, and that's always great. And it's quite important, I think, a lot of the time that you're not alone in those situations, because they can be quite dangerous. And having somebody watching your back and somebody who you can watch the back of is a good idea. It's always a good idea.
LWJ would like to know a little bit more about your gear bag. Go ahead.
Seems slightly inappropriate, but yeah, I can tell you about the gear bag if that's what people want to know. It's what's it got? You want to know about the actual bag or the I don't know what.
He's asking about the gear. I'm assuming the cameras and the rigs.
In this particular instance, I think I had a 5D Mark II, actually a 600D, mainly because my other 5D Mark II had just gone to the Canon Service Center for a sensor clean.
Right.
And it's little things like that which people, I guess, don't realize is goes on in a professional filmmaker's life. We have to do all the same things that everybody else has to do. I still have to drop my cameras off for fixing, so I was a camera down. Luckily, I had just got a 600D the day before, just to play with, and so that went in the bag.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that's a T3i here in the States, so in case people are confused about the 600D.
Yes, sorry,
okay. That's okay.
T3. And 3 lenses, I think. I had I pretty much have the same lenses all the time: a 16 to 35, a 24 to 105, and a 7200 zoom lens. A good tripod, a Kessler slider. I normally have a Kessler pocket dolly, and which I'm sure we'll get to later because obviously there's some controversy about that. Satellite phones, very important, obviously, in situations. I have 2 company satellite phones, a handheld one which looks much like a cell phone, and then a small dish which is yay big, which allows me to send stuff when there's no communications any other way. What else? Oh, and the Red Rock Micro shoulder support, the Red Rock Running Man Nano Rig, I think it's called,
right.
Which which I love actually. It's my go-to rig for this kind of situation. I've got a big shoulder rigs, I've got, steady cams, whatever else. And the reality is, when you're just jumping on a plane like that, and then you don't know what's going to come in the other end, you just want something as small as possible. And so that's what the nano rig is, and I love it. I had a little hand in shaping the way it was made to start off with. Brian from Redbook asked me, amongst others, what I wanted from a product, and because at the time all you could buy was like a big thing with handlebars, and it just wasn't working for the kind of stuff that I was doing. So that's what I've got. And then sound wise, sound really important. Actually, can't stress how important sound is when you're trying to do interviews and stuff. Just radio mics and Sennheiser radio mics and a little Juice Link box which goes inside of the camera, which feeds the audio in from the mics to the 5D. I think that's about it. That's probably geeky enough. I don't know whether there's more geek information people want to know.
Well, they'll ask questions if they do. But one of the things that I was curious about, mainly because we had published a story a couple of months or so ago about a couple of guys that went to Alaska on a 2-week trip. And the thought just sort of came to my mind. Have you ever done anything like with solar power? Are you worried about getting over to that situation and not having enough juice to power your equipment?
Yeah, in fact, power was the biggest problem in Japan, because what we didn't realize, we didn't when we left realize how big it was. I mean, nobody knew how big it was at the time. We were thinking maybe 100, 200 dead, which is terrible and tragic, but not 10,000 plus that we're at now.
Right.
And we didn't realize that most of the power grid had been knocked out for that entire region. But you should travel with enough battery to last you a good day or two. And then we've got little adapters for car charging. Solar power. I don't have a solar battery system. Quite a few of my colleagues do, but they're quite big,
right,
and not very heavy. But you can get sort of table-sized solar power systems, but I just don't. I don't actually have one. So we were completely reliant on getting to, having a car with power, and then after a certain amount of time, because you can't charge everything off the car battery forever. It'll kill the battery. You then reliant on having electricity somewhere else, and it turned into a real issue for us. We ended up having to drive about 3 hours every day to get to a place which had power. So we would go into the disaster zone, shoot, and then come away, find power, and internet. Actually, we could have used a satellite phone, but we thought it better to get to somewhere where there was power and internet and use it. Certainly by the second day anyway, when our batteries and everything were running low. So, but yeah, you're right. It's a constant issue, and maybe I will have to go and buy a solar-powered battery system after this one. I've survived thus far. I remember during the Iraq War, actually, I had a small solar system which just had enough power to power the satellite phone, so that if an emergency happened, then I could actually get make a call.
Well, the gentleman that did the Alaska trip had a very flexible solar panel array that he just strapped to his backpack, that while they were hiking during the day, he was charging the battery. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But that assumption is that you've got, carrying it with you all day in the sun. So anyway. So describe to us the situation, backing up a second, one of the things that you were talking about that I wanted to mention that I thought was fascinating to me was that you said realistically you only spent 2 to 3 hours a day actually shooting, and the rest of it was logistics and getting around, and especially if you have to drive back and forth.
I say this to anybody who's looking to get into journalism and filming. it's sort of 90%, 95% logistics and computer work and techie stuff and research and reading around things and trying to figure out what things are going on. And the last 5% is pressing the button and shooting.
Right.
And, it's such a small part of the actual job. It's obviously a very important part of the job. You've got to get that right. But logistics is probably the single biggest thing, and just knowing, trying to figure out where you're going to, what's going on. It's all about information, and then I think I say this to my students. You need to get to a situation. The reason why you're called a professional is because all the camera stuff and the shooting stuff and everything else should be second nature by the time you get somewhere. Because if you have to worry about like what f-stop you're setting or what shutter speed you're setting or what ND filter you're using, in a situation like that, you're in trouble. You need to be worrying about what's going on. Where am I going? How am I going to stay alive? How am I going to get power? How am I, all that sort of stuff. Is that's the priority, not the geek stuff. So, geek stuff, we love it. It's important, do all that before you go to a place like this. You don't want to be wondering about that when you get there.
So speaking of logistics, my mind goes to how do you deal with food and water? Do you have to carry all that stuff in too?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, like all the other journalists who drove in, we stopped off at a supermarket on the way in, and we just got as much as we could into the car. Especially water. Water is absolutely essential, and some food supplies, enough for a few days, and then we just drove in. So, and I mean, the other thing is when you go into any disaster zone, there will be shortages. You kind of anticipate there's going to be shortages of things like food and water. So even if, where we started in Tokyo, there wasn't really a problem. There were beginning to be food shortages, but it wasn't anything major. But the further north we went out of Tokyo towards the disaster zone, the scarcer and scarcer those resources were. Shops weren't open. Obviously, people had much more pressing things to do than that. So you've got to be prepared for that. You do take as much of as much food and water in as you can. So I mean, it's stuff like that that's way more important than the kit and the camera kit and the geeky stuff. If people are studying journalism or they've just started out in journalism, the one thing that I would do say to them is focus on those practical things, on just living and functioning and being a journalist, and not worrying about the cameras.
Well, we are talking about the camera stuff because that's what
absolutely correct
we're interested in. But one of the things that came up, and obviously I have the same kind of question being an outsider from the news business, is how do you deal with going into a situation like that, knowing that people are going to be hurting, suffering, they maybe don't have food and water, and here you are coming in to report on that. Is there any psychological difficulty there? How do you handle that kind of stuff?
I think there's you'd be unhuman or inhuman, I don't know which is the correct way of saying it, to not have a problem with it. I mean, there's clearly a problem. Anytime that you arrive somewhere and you're fully equipped and you've got food and you've got, you've not been directly affected by the disaster,
right?
And you're seeing people who have been through something horrible, suffering some sort of extreme trauma or hardship. Then, of course, it's going to be, it's hard to take. And I think you have to kind of mentally separate yourself from that. You have to say, I'm here to do a job. My job is to report. That's what gives you kind of license to be there to start off with. Generally, people who have been through that kind of trauma or disaster are accepting of that. Quite often they want to speak to you, and if they do, then that's what gives you the sort of permission to go on, really. And obviously sometimes there are people who don't want to talk to you, who aren't pleased to see you, who think that you're intruding, and you've got to be very respectful of that. So it's a delicate balance. I'm not saying it's easy to take mentally. But compared to the, I guess the focus isn't us. It isn't me. It's not about the journalists. So the focus is the people who've been through the tragedy, and I think that's probably how you deal with it at the time. It's like, well, okay, I might feel bad or uncomfortable, but hey, there's a guy over there who's just had his entire livelihood and house and everything else swept away. It's about him. It's not about me.
Right.
And if he wants to tell a story, let him tell a story. So, it's not I guess it's not the perfect answer, but yeah, it's uncomfortable. It can be a very uncomfortable thing to deal with.
Oh, like I said, I can't fathom. Victoria Taylor Gore also said the same thing. It's admirable that there are people like you willing to do this. I certainly can't comprehend voluntarily going into a situation like that to try to talk to people. So.
I mean, partly mentally, what you try and do is systemize it. Yeah, it's like because I've been to so many of these things, and all the people I know who's been to a lot of these things, have a kind of detachment because it's kind of a little bit like the thing you did before. Obviously, not quite the same, but
right.
I guess it's like being a firefighter, or well, it's not as brave as being a firefighter. Though, firefighters are far braver than I. But it's like anybody who does a routine to deal with a situation that's tragic. And we have the benefit of, after a certain number of these things, going, the ability to go into some kind of routine, and that's what helps you deal with what goes on. I think on a daily basis, on a practical basis.
Right.
And just remembering, that it isn't about me, and it isn't about the journalist. It is about the person who's been affected. That's the best answer I can give, I'm afraid.
Well, that's a darn good one, and I appreciate that, because I'm on the outside and trying to understand how it works on the inside, and so it's just difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the people you've got to take your hat off to are rescue workers, are the poor people working in the nuclear power plant now trying to save it, and the doctors and nurses and all those, and the emergency services. They're the people who really, see and do the worst of it. It's not us, the journalists. I think there's a different issue for journalists, which is normally the cumulative effect of going to multiple disasters, one after the other, and that can take its time in a different way over a length of time. But I don't think we have it as hard as those other folks and those other professions in this sort of disaster zones, to be honest.
Well, let's get into the actual video that you shot. Curiously, in that kind of environment, how much video lengthwise did you shoot?
Okay, so we say the video. I mean, what's interesting is the video that caused a certain amount of debate, shall we say, on Vimeo, was only, it was one of, I think, 3 or 4 that I shot while I was in Japan, and it wasn't the main one. My main job was to file a very straightforward news package video. Package is what it's a sort of TV term. It basically means report.
Right.
With a reporter standing there saying this is what's going on, and some shots of the devastation. So we did those every day, and I took the time to shoot this second video which is the one on Vimeo, which features it's shots of one of the places that we arrived at, which was badly affected, destroyed, and that's it. I mean, I set it to some music, and the whole idea behind it was to give the viewer some idea of what it was like to be there, because I felt that, having been to a lot of these kind of things, that I hadn't really ever created something that kind of took you there in the same way that video that I shot had.
Right.
So I had in the back of my head that I just wanted to communicate a little bit more about what it's like just to be stood there as an individual. And so that's what I did, and that's what caused the almighty ruckus that followed.
Well, I found it very interesting that the day after the video was posted, we have a chat room. I don't know if you've been there yet, but there's a chat room, and I posted on Twitter that we were going to talk about, after I had posted the news story, that we were going to talk about that video in the chat room, and we got probably 20 people showed up suddenly. And one of the things that I did was I linked everybody to your video, and everybody was talking about your video, the one with the music, and then I showed them the same video that you had shot that the Guardian recut.
Correct, yeah.
With just the audio and the people talking. And it's the same video. And so it was interesting that the consensus in the chat room sort of was, I mean, the initial upset, as you well know, was that the slider moves were really wrong for a news report.
Correct. Yeah, that's what people thought. And
and in the chat room, I think we eventually decided, after looking at both videos, because it's virtually the same video in both cases with a different audio track. And so what people really eventually came to was that it wasn't the slider moves, because in the version that the Guardian posted, the same slider moves were there, but it was a different audio track. And so what I think it really sort of boiled down to was simply the choice of music in that case. That yes. They didn't care about the slider, although many people said the slider, you shouldn't be doing a slider, that's ruining, it's not news, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I found it fascinating.
Well, I'm going to explain for those who haven't followed it too closely exactly why I felt that was appropriate. As I said, we'd already done a very straight news report. It's not that I believe that. I mean, some people have mischaracterized it and said, well, obviously that's how I believe all news should be done. It's not. I still believe in the regular news format that people see on TV every day. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's bad or it should stop or that it should be replaced entirely with music and slider moves. It's not saying that. This isn't also, this isn't and. This is just another way for people to look at news.
Right.
And it's a choice, it's a free choice. It's on Vimeo. You don't have to watch it. You can click it on, you can watch it for 5 seconds, say you don't like it, move on. And I think it's important that, as journalists, we try and show the world in different ways, and show what we're seeing in different ways and offer choice to the viewer, as to how they want to consume their coverage and therefore increase their understanding of an event like the tsunami. The choice of music and the choice of slider was partly because I really felt in that instance it gave a better sense of being there than just straight shots would have.
Right.
And that's it, and you can question whether that's the right decision or the wrong decision. But I mean, I hope that you can't question the motivation, which is just to bring the viewer to a closer understanding of what it is to be me and be there. Well, not be me, but just to be there.
Right.
And the one thing that has been kind of interesting since is that I've had a few days later, so now in the past couple of days, I've had a lot more response from fellow professionals as opposed to people from the blogosphere and people who are actually there. And I think the majority of people who have witnessed those things directly would have a similar view to me, which is they can see what I'm trying to do. They might not agree with it,
right?
But they can see what I'm trying to do because they know what it's that sort of strange feeling that I was trying to convey of actually weird calm and oddly peacefulness that you get in that immediate aftermath. Which people who haven't been through these things or don't follow it too closely possibly don't quite understand. And if you watch a lot of regular TV news reports, it always seems dramatic. There's lots of action happening. There's something, and the way they just cut from one place to the next to the next. So here's our reporter here and here's our reporter here,
right.
And it has a sort of momentum. And actually, when you're there, it feels like a million miles from that. It's very sort of still. And yes, there are people sort of sifting through the rubble, trying to find relatives, trying to find their belongings, doing desperate things, but it's spread out over this vast area, and you can walk for like half a mile and not see anybody. It's just wreckage.
Right.
I think what added to that, and actually only a couple of people picked up on, I think one of the reasons why a lot of people find it slightly odd or disconcerting is it was a bright, sunny day. It was a lovely day.
Right.
So to see the combination of all this wreckage and then the bright sunlight and the vivid colours, was odd. It was strange. It's not supposed to be normal. It's not supposed to feel normal, and it certainly didn't feel normal being there. It never does. It feels very, very odd. So hopefully that's what some people at least took away from it.
I think the answer is that many of us did. I certainly took away the emotion of it. Victoria mentioned that she did too as well. Mike Spin says, for me personally, a piece like Dan's or Khalid I can't pronounce his last name, his Haiti piece, are far more moving than a standard news package. And so, it impacted people, and it impacted them obviously in many different ways. One of the things that I mentioned in the chat room during that day that we were discussing it was that I had actually just gotten up from having lunch, and I was watching CNN coverage of the disaster, and just before going into a break, they played a 30-second long piece. I'm guessing it was 30 seconds of stills. Okay, it wasn't motion and it wasn't slider moves, but it was stills. And guess what? It was set to some pretty dramatic, sad style music. I mean, and I think that's been typical in the past. And people, I don't think, tend to really recognize that the news media has done that. And when they saw it in your video, it was even, for some reason, more dramatic. But I recall watching other disaster kinds of things, and within a couple of hours, most of the news media guys, when they go to a break, they start showing these pictures and some dramatic music to go with it. So I wasn't really all that surprised.
I think there's a couple of issues there. I mean, one, I do think news media, certainly in Asia, and actually, yes, net broadcasters like the BBC and CNN, they've used images and music regularly for a long time.
Right.
Quite often, like as you say, just before you go to a break or as an introduction to a section on the show. I remember watching events from Egypt, and the BBC had a fantastic sort of montage of music and imagery from the celebrations in Tahrir Square, and nobody was really saying that was so terrible.
Right.
Is it appropriate? But in a way, that's kind of not so important as to whether it's appropriate or not. I mean, just because we've been doing it in the news media for a while still doesn't make it right or not. It's quite interesting. It is kind of an interesting point to debate, right. Perhaps even those people who reacted negatively, if they can take anything positive away from it, would be that, you know, it might cause them to re-examine how they consume, how we are all consuming news from events like this, you know, and just to think about what it is that we're being told, what we're being broadcasted, you know, and how we react to that, and how we interact with that.
Right.
So, you know, I accept I can't please all the people all the time, you know, and I think if you go around trying to do that, you'll ultimately fail, and you won't be any good at anything. So, you know, whilst I don't like negative comment, I kind of accept that, you know, we're just not going to agree. I'm not going to agree with everybody on everything. Right. Please, you know, if you do take anything away, think about the wider context. Think about what it, you know. Next time you watch the news, you know, perhaps just try and think about all those issues behind it and how you think about it.
Right. And one of the other things that came up in the chat room several times was the timing of the issue. They said that if it was 6 months or a year out, the people that were upset said, you know, this would make more sense if it was sort of a historical piece showing the past. And I said, well, you know, somebody's got to record those slider moves during the time in order to show it 6 months later. If, you know, so you at least had to, I think, be there to record it. So, you know, there were just so many different interesting aspects of it to me that it was a very fantastic discussion, and I really enjoyed learning and thinking about all of those issues at the time.
No, I appreciate that, and I think, you know, I didn't intend to cause a debate about it, you know, and it really shouldn't have been the focus of anybody's attention. Actually, you know, if I'm honest, at that time, you know, it should have been with the people. Our thoughts and, you know, efforts should have been with the people of Japan. Right. But, you know, it has caused a debate. And, you know, certainly now with a little bit of distance, I think it probably is worth getting into. And, yeah, that it's funny. I mean, I don't think I've actually met two people who agree on it. You know, there's always something, you know, you can not agree about the timing, you can agree about the sliders and the music, you know, the choice of place that we show to feature. There's so many things that you can agree to disagree on. I think we just have to agree to disagree on those things, and you know, move on, and just hope that it expands all of our understanding of you know, of news and news media. And I personally think there's a lot more room for imagery, strong imagery, you know, with or without music, but strong imagery that takes you to a place. You know, and I think one of the things that the news media as a whole have been guilty of slightly is compartmentalizing news, packaging news up in a way that puts distance actually between the viewer and the subject. Right. You know, you hear, and it's only in the UK, you hear it all the time. For those who don't know, I'm from the UK. I'm Chinese. I live in China, but I'm actually British born, and I have a British passport, all that stuff. You know, and we quite often, and then you say, you know what, you know, did you see the news today, or is it on the news, or, you know, so it's news. So news is like over there. It's like not part of our, you know, you can choose to ignore the news or not, you know, and I kind of think that's really not quite how I'd like it. You know, news is, it's many things. You know, there's stock market news, there's news of disasters, there's news about the royal wedding. You know, they're not, all of those things should have a different place, and they, you know, some of those things should be forcing you to think about bigger issues or forcing you to have an emotional response. Right. And well, say force is the wrong word, but they, you know, for most people, they should. You should give them the option to have that kind of response should they want to, and I think that's what we're missing quite a lot of the time. And I think the great thing about, and this brings it back to our little community here with you know, Planet 5D and filmmaking. You know, some of the skills that we have, or certainly I've learned being around great people like the ones on your forum, is, you know, the creative side of filmmaking can be applied, I believe, to reporting on live events, on news events. Whether it's for the now or if it's for 6 months down the road, we can debate that. But, you're right. We should be using some of these storytelling skills, which we use in fiction because they're the best way to tell a story.
Right.
In reality, because it's the best way to tell a story. We don't use this stuff in fictional filmmaking because it's techie or geeky or funky or whatever else. We use all these techniques because they help you tell a story better.
Right.
And if they help you tell a fictional story better, well, you know what? They can often help you to tell a real world story better as well. And that's why I believe that this is a discussion that's worth having, and not just by me, but I've had it with my students clearly, and I think a lot of new people coming into the industry get it, and also a lot of veterans get it. The other guys and girls on your DSLR news shooter who have been in the business longer than I have, and they get it, and they can see the application of the techniques and the equipment and everything else, not because it's cool, but because it helps you do the storytelling better. And I think that's what we should all strive for.
So I kind of hear a hint in there of what you're saying is almost sort of like I shouldn't say planned on causing a stir. And Mike Spins asked the question, were you surprised by the reaction of the criticism? I mean, obviously you'd seen Khalid's piece from Haiti, so the idea was already seated in your head, and you already knew that there was controversy that came out of that. So I guess I'm supposing you sort of expected some out of this. Is that true?
To be honest, I mean, I edited this thing. I shot it in the day. I then spent most of the night editing the straight news video, which went up on the Guardian site. I edited this between about, 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. on the morning after I shot it, in my sort of suspended state of tiredness, anxiety, and whatever else. And I really didn't have a thought about how it was going to be perceived. I just wanted to give people a sense of what it was like to be there. And, the other option was just to leave it at the news package and just go to bed. And that was, I just felt something inside me was going, I really like this, and it's really weird. You really shouldn't use words like in the context of something. But I really thought it was worthwhile,
right?
To make the extra effort to put those shots together in a different way, and just try and convey what it was like to be there. And I don't know. Did I expect that reaction? Actually, no, not really. Especially since I thought a lot of the issues had been kind of talked out and played out after Khalid's piece. Certainly by the sort of smaller community of filmmakers that I feel like I'm privileged to be a part of. But there's been a large discussion around that, and I thought we all kind of agreed to disagree in a sort of civilized way. New people coming into the discussion and say, yeah, okay, so it all went round again. I think, for me, it was just part of an ongoing way of covering events. I started doing this before DSLRs came along. I think if people looked at my blog on DSLR News Shooter, there's a piece there which I shot in 2008 when the Bird's Nest Stadium, the Olympic Stadium in China, was opened for the first time to the media. And I went there to do a very straight news piece. And actually I thought, well, what's interesting about this place is that, when it's all empty and it's just it's a dull, grey Beijing day, and you've got these security guys walking around looking very, militaristic. Right. And you've got... it just felt a certain way, and what I ended up shooting was a film that tried to show that. And I actually did it in black and white, which may or may not have been the right thing, but there was no voice track. It was just music and shots, and it never got published. The Guardian didn't like it, much in the way that some of my editors didn't like the piece that I filed from the tsunami. And I still did it, and I've done that consistently for the past few years in places that I've been to. People might have seen the other things that I've done, from like Chinese National Day Parade, from North Korea, and from other places as well. And I really believe that it's a way of adding to how we cover events. I still have to do the other stuff. People don't forget. People that I still have to do all the regular news coverage that I have to do. They still want that. My employers still want that. People still want that, and that's fine, and I'll do that. So this is just a plus level to what I was, to my coverage.
I'm going to interrupt you. I have to say that from the pieces that I have seen of yours, I watched just the other day the piece that you were talking about, the birdcage stadium piece. It's I won't say brilliant, but it's a very good piece. And the one that you did, I can't remember the Chinese I don't want to say ghetto, but the apartment complex.
The Shanghai apartment blocks, yeah.
Fascinating stuff, especially for those of us out here who aren't exposed to those. And mostly, like you say, they're not news reports. They're just sort of a visual take on what's going on in that environment that we don't ever get. And I appreciate those kind of things. So you're doing a good job.
Thank you. Well, I honestly accept it's not for everybody.
Right.
I just would like to hope that some of the people who don't like it could at least accept that it's not done out of, ego or, trying to just like shout about my filmmaking. It's this predates all of this DSLR stuff and sliders and everything else. It's something I've been trying to do for a very long time, just as a sort of visual journalist,
right?
Trying to show the world in a slightly different way, in a way people hopefully do find interesting, or causes them to think, I never knew that. Or it somehow feels. If I can try and convey a little bit of the feel for the place, like I hope I did from the Shanghai place. That had another whole argument about it, actually. That video, I don't know if you can link to it, but I used the tilt shift lens a lot in that video.
Right.
To give it a slightly dreamy effect. And some people objected to that. So, I can accept people don't like that as well, but please accept the motivation, which is just to try and make you feel like you're there.
And I really think that's working, so I appreciate that. I got a couple of more questions, and I'm just going to throw them at you.
Okay.
Earlier, Brett had asked, how did you choose the music for this Japan piece?
Okay, so that was very interesting. I don't know how many people know this, but actually, I didn't choose it. I actually was so tired, I actually asked for help on Twitter. So I put out a message saying, I'm trying to find some suitable music to go with some slider shots from the tsunami. Please help. Which I got a response. I probably shouldn't name names about who responded in case they get into even more trouble. But I got a response, and people sent some suggestions. And in my very tired state, I was able to listen to sort of 5 or 6 tracks and make a choice over the one that I thought worked best. And so it was actually a crowdsourced audio track, which was, I've never done that before.
Right.
Probably won't do it again after this last experience. But I actually think the music worked really well.
It did.
For me, because I listened to a lot of tracks and they really didn't give me a feel. They didn't gel, and somehow the combination of that music and those images take me personally back there every time I look at it, and that's so from a personal point of view, that's success.
Mike Spins asked just a second ago, and I'm typing just so people know. I will post the links to the videos that we talked about, the Shanghai apartments and the
Sure.
bird cage, so that people know where to find those. If when they're watching the replay, if they want to see those, they'll be on the blog.
Right.
An interesting question. Where to go? Logic876 would like to know what your technique or approach in framing shots. Do you have it? Do
I have a technique? I mean, yeah. Okay. So my background, for those who came in late or who don't know, it's as a stills photographer. So not a videographer. I've only been shooting video for about five or 6 years now. I shall lose track. It's probably slightly longer, so 6 or 7 years now. And I think I take my technique from stills photography across to video. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times. I think I just, what's my technique? I don't know. I just see shots. I'm one of those people that just, I basically see the whole world in shots.
right?
And I think a lot of, great DPs or photographers or filmmakers probably do the same thing. It's hard to analyze. Somebody once said to me, and it's going to sound kind of racist, but it came from an Asian anyway. So, so that's not so bad. But, he said, I look at the world with very Asian eyes. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I look at your photography and I see a lot of geometric patterns. And I've never really been able to get to the bottom of it, but I can kind of see what that person was getting at when they looked at my pictures. I guess subconsciously when I'm looking at the world, I'm constantly seeing the geometry of everything, whether that's a beautiful building or horrible scenes in a disaster zone. Something in my subconscious just allows me to break down that scene and construct it in a certain way. And then what I've had to learn with filmmaking is actually, well, that's all well and good, being able to sort of see a singular image. It's then how do you make that image move? How do you bring it alive? How do you sequence it with the next shot to tell a story? So I haven't got. Apologies to your blogger, but I don't have a magic formula of fairy dust I can sprinkle to kind of the Patience and Dan Chung formula for framing shots. But apart from the sort of the very basics of obviously you do your wide and your mid shot and your tight shot and all the sort of things that you get taught in video school. As to what makes a really good shot, I don't know. I haven't analysed it enough to know. I'm really sorry. I can't. Maybe somebody else can do a better analysis of what it is that makes a really good shot. I mean, I think one thing I would say, weirdly, the tsunami film is probably the one that broke my own rules. But generally, it's about people. It's all about people. I mean, it was about people, but it was about people It was about people by just not showing so many people. Right. It was showing the wreckage of people's lives and, people's belongings and people's houses. So that was about people. But I think, a lot of what I do is focused on people and the compositions and how you frame your shots somehow relates to the subject, which is most of the time what I do, people. So just thinking about how people relate to the image is kind of important. That certainly sounds like a lot of nonsense, but it kind of I don't know. Try and make sense of that if you will. But
well, that's a lot different than going, well, I believe in the rule of thirds, and you have to put the person. Everybody has their own style, so that's a good answer.
Yeah, it's not a highly technical sort of thought out image compositional thing. It's not that. I mean, it's much more. It's from like down here somewhere. You kind of, or up here. I don't know. You just see it, and then you think about how you move it. That's it.
You mentioned education. Victoria wanted to know where you're teaching. I think she probably came. I know she came in late. Would you tell us?
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
I have a MA class, a master's class, which I do a few days a semester on in lecturing in Beijing. It's actually run by a British university, University of Bolton, and it's MA in, I think, I don't know what the actual MA is. It's either multimedia journalism or visual journalism. It's one of the it's an MA course in that. So there's 20 or so students. They're really good. Really, I mean, I think, you know, in years to come, it won't be Dan Chung that you're watching videos from. It'll be these guys and ladies who, you know, they're doing good stuff, and they're really coming on. And I think, you know, across the world, there's a whole other generation of visual journalists, filmmakers, photographers, call them what you will, who certainly understand what I'm talking about, understand the issues, and they're going to use that in their professional careers to create really interesting stuff. And I'm looking forward to that.
Do you think because they're sort of growing up in a more visual video world that they're seeing things differently than you and I do?
Yeah, I believe that. You know, they don't have all the hang-ups of, you know, convention, of 40 years of convention that I've gone through. You know, they may not know about half of the things that have gone before, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
You know, nobody said that the news business or documentary or feature work or, you know, feature films or whatever, it should be the same. It's not a static thing. You know, the mediums evolve. I find it weird that people think that news has stayed the same, because it really hasn't. You know, TV news has changed consistently. You know, every few years there's a change in TV news, and you know, CNN hasn't been there forever. I mean, right. CNN is a relatively new invention.
That's right.
In the history of news, you know, and at the time people got very upset about that, and you know, the whole concept of satellite news and whether it was, you know, improving or ruining our coverage of the world. And you know, so yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think, again, it's something else that hopefully people will take away from this debate. If they take away anything, is that none of these mediums are constant. They're always changing. They're always in a stage of evolution. And, you know, you have a right as a consumer of this stuff to express your opinion about how you want it to work out. And I wouldn't take that away from anybody. You know, you might not like it. You know, yeah, actually do tell me you don't like it. Do tell others in news organizations you do or don't like what you do or don't like, because it matters, because it does actually shape the way in which we consume this important stuff.
Victoria would like to know, and I think this is an excellent question, and it fits right in there. Do you think that HDLSRs are essential for journalism and photography students?
No, actually. I don't think they're essential. I think that they're very important. I think it's really important that you understand what it is that they do, and understand you know, the advantages of it, and then you make a choice about how you do things accordingly. So, you know, you may decide that you only ever want to shoot all your documentary or your reporting on something like this, you know, or you may decide that you only ever want to shoot it on a big ENG camera. The point is not the ultimate decision that you make about how you report on something. It's that you're aware of, when you're studying, that you're aware of all the options and what they do and what they bring to the table, you know, should you choose to use them. I personally believe HDSLR technology is perfect for me, I think, and it's a really great tool, and it can really help you tell a story better. There are times when it doesn't, and knowing when it doesn't helps. You know, sometimes a GoPro is the best camera to use. You know, a little GoPro helmet cam. Right. Sometimes, you know, a really big TV camera with a big long zoom lens is the right camera to use. But when you're studying, what you should be studying is, well, when is it the right time to use this? In my own head, what choices do I have, and why should I use them? So there you go.
Along with that, I guess, sort of question, in the situation of the coverage of Japan that you went into, did the HDLSR help you or hurt you yes or both, would it have been easier or worse to have one of the ENG cameras? Tell us.
Okay, so the practical side of DSLR is that your back is a lot better off for it. You can carry a DSLR for a much longer period of time. You can carry a DSLR and a slider and a range of lenses, and it still weighs less than my ENG camera would do. And I have an ENG camera. I didn't choose to take it with me.
Right.
No, I have everything from I have a Sony EX1, I have a big Sony DSR, news gathering camera with a big lens on the front. I can use any of those cameras, and 9 times out of 10, I choose to use a DSLR. And that's mainly for the aesthetic, but also for the practical thing about it just being smaller and lighter, and actually less intrusive. And people are saying, we're using a slider on a tripod, and it's like, isn't that really like intrusive in a situation? Compared to the guy next to me, and a lot of the times, less so. I'm not saying it's like not intrusive, but it's less so than, a very large ENG camera, a tripod, a satellite truck, and a team of 3 or 4 people, all doing stuff.
Right.
So, I try to be a fly on the wall as much as possible. That's my style. It's just sort of to be as low profile as possible. And actually, I don't think the addition of a tripod and a slider, to a DSLR isn't as obtrusive as people might imagine in those situations. That's just my opinion.
Well, I guess somebody would say it was intrusive if people came up to you and said, "What the heck are you doing?" Did anybody do that?
No, but I mean, I think that's. Well, I think people have, in a way, that it's slightly unfair to people who would be anti that, because I mean, in those situations, people have got far more important things to worry about.
Right.
Far more important things to worry about.
Right.
So, in fairness, I think. Maybe that's more of an issue if you went to like a demonstration in Wisconsin or something like that. And then people started questioning why you're using a slider and does it get in the way. But generally, people even in those situations, they tend not to. They might be curious, but they're not anti-using like a slider. And people are saying, well, you wouldn't take a jib into that situation. Well, I probably wouldn't now, and it might be too intrusive, but, pull it out. It's any filmmaking or creative tool. It's like saying to a TV news crew, don't take your satellite truck into somewhere because it's intrusive. Well, in a way it is, but it generally just becomes part of the, large technical objects like satellite trucks, like tripods, like sliders, whatever, quite regularly become part of people's expectation from a place like that if it is used regularly. The satellite truck is not a usual thing to see in the middle of a disaster, but it is now because we're just so used to seeing it on TV.
Right.
So, it's accepted because of its regularity of use, not because a large truck with a dish on top is normally to be found parked at the end of the street.
Yeah. Victoria says that's a great point. Sven would like to know, is HDLSR gear relatively affordable and available to Chinese consumers?
Yes. Well, affordable, it depends how rich you are. Most Chinese people don't earn as much money, don't earn enough to pay for an HD DSLR in a year as one costs, but relative to the rest of the world, they're probably cheaper here than the US, possibly. Well, maybe about the same as the US. And you can easily buy one if you have the money. And certainly to students who obviously have some money to have an education here, then yes, they're reasonably accessible.
Tony would like to know... I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Tony would like to know, do you ever carry lighting or try to light any of your shots in situations like that?
In situations like that, minimal lighting. I mean, I've got a little LED light panel type thing, which is, this big, and that's just so that you can actually see in certain situations. But with a DSLR, that's even, I tend to use it less and less because as we all know that they're really good in low light. would I try and light that scene with big lights, add drama that way? No, probably not. But again, I wouldn't 100% rule it out, but my feeling is at this point I wouldn't ever do that. I don't think.
All right. I think we've gone through most of the questions. I could probably ask you a half a dozen more and chat for a while, but we've been at it for almost an hour and a half, so I wanted to let you know that we certainly appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat with us here, and those who are in the chat room also really appreciate it. And we also appreciate what you're doing, because I know that kind of job must be very difficult to accomplish.
Well, thank you, but it sounds like a cliche, but it really isn't about me. It is about in this instance, the poor folks in Japan, and I really hope anybody who saw that work was in some way moved by it, or at least understood a bit more because of it. And if that then causes them to donate or to at least say a prayer, or just think about the issues more, then I think that's a good thing, and I'm happy. So, but thank you for giving me time to talk about it.
It's my pleasure. Anything you want to say on the way out in terms of where people can find your stuff?
Well, no, I think you said it. Head to The Guardian, head to DSLR News Shooter. They're all great resources. I'll say they're great resources. I can say that because it's not just me; it's a lot of other people, great people out there contributing stuff. And great. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Okay. Bye, everybody.